organizations directly. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Tinisha Agramonte. Tinisha is the director of the Office of Civil Rights at the United States Department of Commerce. She has over 25 years of experience in the equal employment, diversity, civil rights, and human relations arenas. And in that experience, she has held leadership positions with federal agencies across the board, including the current one, Department of Commerce, Veterans Affairs, Army and Air Force, and the Small Business Administration. Those positions have taken her around the world, where she's worked in England, Japan, and Germany. And she is the architect of the First Generation Professionals Initiative. This is the first of its kind program in the federal government and is available to all employees across all federal government agencies who are the first in their family to have a professional job to provide mentorship and support. Academically, she received her bachelor's degree in mass communications from California State University, Hayward, and her master's degree in human relations from the University of Oklahoma. Tanisha, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to be controlling these slides for you and look forward to your presentation and to the question and answers that we have with our guests after your presentation. For all of you who are joining us, your participation is vital in our usually I say our most important guest is everyone in here. I like Tinisha so much that she might be our most important guest, but the second most important guest, very, very close second, is all of you in here. And so please take a moment as we get started to open the chat box and introduce yourself via chat about your relationship with FIU, your career goals, anything else that you hope to learn today or what drew you to the session. How we're going to handle questions is anytime you have a question, go ahead and chat it into the chat via text. And then what I'm going to do after Tanisha's presentation is I will call on people who have chatted a question to ask that question to Tanisha via video so we can see and hear some of the great individuals we have with us today. So with all of that housekeeping, Tanisha, I turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you this morning. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us today for this hour or so virtual training. I hope that all of you are remaining safe, healthy, and in positive spirits during these very challenging times. Before I even get into the substance of the presentation, just a couple of things. I want to continue Eric's very conversational type delivery. I have my coffee with me today. That's because I wanted to serve as a reminder that this is a relaxing environment, sort of like a coffee chat. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you things that I wish I knew very early on in my career. And that's not to say that even when you become a seasoned professional, that there aren't unwritten rules that you have to discover, uncover at every level of your professional journey. But really what inspired me to do this workshop in particular was being someone who's the first in my family to graduate college. When I entered the professional workspace, I thought I was golden. I thought everything would be fine because I was armed with a college education. Surely I would go into this workforce and just excel. And that was not the case. I can't tell you how many times I had that uh-oh moment where I knew I did something wrong, but I didn't know exactly what I did wrong. What I realized early on is that I had violated unwritten rules. But the problem with unwritten rules is many times they do not become clear to you until you actually violate them. And in my case, some of those times almost served as career derailers for me. And I was so lost, just hoping and praying that someone, anyone, would come help guide me, because it seemed like everyone else in the workplace knew something that I didn't know. It seemed like everyone else had figured out how to crack a code, that they knew some rules to a game we were playing, and that I was the only one that was lost trying to figure it out. And so that is really what drives me to do this type of training, because I want to arm each and every one of you with just some tips and lessons learned that I've had, that if it helps even one of you avoid some of the missteps that I had around unwritten rules, then I'll feel like today was a success. I'm also going to rely on all the folks that we have on the call because you all serve as a wealth of knowledge. I mean, just on this call, the collective wisdom and experience. So it's not just me. I really want this to be an interactive session, casual conversation, where if you have something to add that can serve as value to the folks to help them thrive and succeed in the workplace, please, please contribute. So with that said, before I get started, Eric, were there anything in the chat in terms of comments about expectations for today?
I'm glad to see the folks are introducing themselves so far. I'm keeping an eye on what they're hoping to learn. I see that someone wants to learn about your experiences working in human rights. We do have some first-generation students, including Emmanuel, who I know from my global learning days and have been participating in the Peace Corps. It's a Peace Corps. It's great to see you here, Emmanuel. I'm glad that you're safe. So we'll keep an eye on that. Fiorina is excited to learn about the best career tips in ensuring success.
Awesome. Okay. So with that said, navigating the unwritten rules in the workplace, a key for career success. I believe this from the bottom of my heart, that if you are in the workplace and you have a lack of understanding of those rules that are not written down, it's sort of like the social mores in the company, the sort of tacit understanding of how things get done, what you have to do to get promoted, all of those things that drive the organizational culture and for you to be successful. And I know Eric hates next slide, but that's all I know. So Eric, next slide, please. All right. So when we're talking about unwritten rules, these are some of the guiding questions. Like, have you ever thought to yourself, I wish I'd known that? Oh, I'm trying to move over these pictures. Okay. I'm sorry, guys. All right. What are the unstated or unwritten rules that are necessary to play the game? And I also want to have a conversation about what that means to play the game, and does that rub you the wrong way? But what are these rules to play the game that may drive your professional success? How do you uncover these rules? And when is it necessary to play or not to play the rules? That's what we're going to discuss today. Next. All right, so what are unwritten rules? Let's look at some from a social. On the next slide, we'll see my staff added this extra little slide in here, which is great. This little curtain of where do we keep the unwritten rules? A lot of people just don't know where to find them. That's what we're going to discover today. These are the rules that really determine who and what gets promoted. So these are the unwritten rules. They're really the invisible forces that are beneath the surface, right? But they shape the organizational cultural norms, the behaviors, the expected behaviors in the workplace. Many times they're unwritten, unspoken, they're learned rules just from observing what other people are doing. But the reality is they carry so much weight. They significantly impact your job satisfaction, your advancement opportunities, and your career trajectory. Like I said early on, when I didn't know the rules and I violated them, many times my career was about to go off the track. So a lot of times they do operate along with the mission statement, and they are explicitly, or the rules that are explicitly stated, but a lot of times they contradict. And so we're going to talk about that. And really, a lot of times they're just a reflection of your boss's preferences. So it'll be really important for you to learn how to be observant of your boss's preferences. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So again, wrapping it, tying it all up, behavioral and conduct nuances that are critical for your success. Next, Eric. All right, so here are some uncommon written rules, and I put them in 3 categories. Sports, because I love sports. So even though I'm 51 years old, I am a softball player until they take me off of that field. So I'm going to continue to play softball. And you can't tell me I'm not the fastest woman out there, even with the 20-something-year-old interns that we have playing on our team. So for those of you who play sports, you might be familiar with this, like, you know, in baseball in particular and softball, that you don't steal bases when your team is far ahead. I don't think that's written in any of the playbooks. It's just an understood kind of rule. Again, in basketball, you see this unwritten rule that if you're late in the fourth quarter and you're winning, they're going to pull the starters. No need to keep the starters in there when you're way ahead, right? Same rule kind of thing in football. Let's move on to the social column. Although this one is written and that it's posted, like if you live in DC on the metros, people still violate it. Do not talk on the phone or play music in public places, but I know that we've heard a lot of people, especially will pull out their phones and they're actually FaceTiming with people. By raising your hands, how many of you have witnessed this, where someone has their phone out and they're FaceTiming with folks? Okay. Do not ask for something if it's the person only has one left. When you're out to dinner, this is a favorite of mine, especially when I was first starting out in my career. I had limited funds, but I would go out to dinner with people who were making significantly more than I was making. And they would order a whole bunch, of food. And then you'd have someone that didn't, order as much, but the expectation was that they were going to split the check all the way. So that should never come from the person who ordered all the expensive stuff. And then bonus, if you borrow someone's car, it's just an expectation you fill up the tank. So now that was just to introduce you to sort of those social unwritten rules, sports unwritten rules. So now let's go to the workplace. 3 that jump out the most that I hear from people is do not contradict your boss publicly. And some people will say, Tanisha, but that's so common sense that you wouldn't do that. I don't think it is that common sense, because I think a lot of times people, especially when you're new to an organization and you're trying to prove that you belong there and you want to show your value and your worth, it is not your intention to contradict your boss all the time, but you're just raising a different perspective, different point of view, not realizing how that's perceived by your boss, right? So that's something to be mindful of and careful. And I want to say at this point, all of the unwritten rules that we talk about today are just that. It doesn't mean that they're right, doesn't mean that they're wrong, but this is really just an opportunity to make people aware that they even exist and give you some tips and tools on how to navigate them. But you have to discern for yourself which ones are appropriate, which ones you're willing to adhere to. Do not state a problem without offering a solution. That's something I've heard all of my career, but it wasn't until recently that I realized that actually can be detrimental to an organization's innovation and creativity. Be kind, respectful to everyone, regardless of where they're at on the food chain, on the rank structure. Next. All right, so let's talk about some DC specific common unwritten rules. So these are things, if you do not live in DC and you plan to come to DC, these are helpful to know just in terms of navigating DC culture. For those of you who live in DC, I want you to start thinking right now about something that I may not have covered. And in the chat box, share some more DC unwritten rules. So with regards to transportation, this is all very huge. Anyone who rides the metro knows that you stand on the right and you walk on the left. I remember the very first time I started working in DC and became part of this commuter culture. The first 2 weeks, I was like, oh my God, these people are so rude on the metro. Like, they're knocking people over, they're running for trains. And I would tell my husband, I can't believe how insensitive these riders are on the train. And then like my 3rd week, I was running late to catch my MARC train home. And for those of you not familiar with DC, MARC is like a regional train. It's part of Amtrak. So my commute to work is 2.5 hours each way to get from my home to DC. So this MARC train is part of that. If I miss my 6:23 MARC train, my next train is at 9 o'clock. So one night I was running late and I was trying to get to the train. And I remember this 3rd weekend, there were a whole bunch of tourists, families, they were standing on the left side. And I was like, excuse me, hello, you stand on the right, you walk on the left. And I was like, oh my God, I'm becoming part of the DC rude culture, on the metro. But that's one thing to remember about the metro. Don't block people exiting the doorway. You have to know if it's going to be a 6-car train or an 8-car train by the markers, because if you're in the wrong spot, that train will go right past you. And by the time you try to board, you've already missed the opportunity. Cabs, I had the unfortunate experience one time of exiting on the left, and the biker almost flipped over the door. Um, the biker shared with me some words. There was an exchange, and then I realized how dangerous that was. So I have to exit on the right side. Also, they have something called slugging in the DMV area, DC, Virginia, Maryland area. And they have very orderly fashion, and there are rules about using the slug line. For example, you should not talk when you're in the car. So those are all sort of unwritten rules, things you learn. Social, DC is very diverse. You're going to get people from all different walks of life. And so it's very important to be open and receptive to new people, new places, new experiences. I'm sharing the sports one just because I play sports. So we play football, softball, soccer on the mall. And if we're on the mall and we've made these makeshift fields, please don't walk on our fields. Now, to the workplace. Dress code is definitely business attire. You will see more people in DC in suits. And people commonly ask, where do you work? What do you do? It's not uncommon. That's sort of like a DC thing. That may be true of other major cities too, but definitely in DC. Also, they may ask you, where are you from? Because there are a lot of people, again, from different parts of the world, but they may just be asking, what state are you from? So be prepared for that. And you must have a basic knowledge of federal politics and demonstrate some type of political savvy if you work in DC. Next. So I'm going to stop right here before we go on to recognizing and navigating these implicit codes, these unwritten rules. I want to do a pulse check. Are there any sort of unwritten rules that jumped out at you, whether it's DC centric or just any in the workplace that I didn't mention?
And feel free to unmute yourselves and answer Tanisha's between presentation questions if you'd like.
Hello, Miss Agramonte. My name is Travis Dozier. My name is different from the screen.
Okay.
And I just have a really specific question. How do you navigate, with your peers and your superiors being assertive without being labeled the ABW?
Tell me what ABW is.
Angry
Black man, woman.
Yeah.
And angry black man or angry black woman. So I think we're going to hit on that later, but I'm going to talk about it right now specifically. So I think when you're navigating the rules, part of it is developing that political savvy that I talked about, having self-awareness. I have had to explain to people, sometimes I was angry, right? But knowing that there's going to be a perception that anything I do, if I elevate the decibel level when I'm speaking, my facial expressions sometimes give me, away, right? And I understand that there's going to be a heightened sort of perception just based on the research shows us that, right? That there's that perception of angry black male, angry black female. So I've had to think to myself, is it on me to shape other people's perceptions? Or is it on them to be educated not to put that unconscious bias on me? But most of it is, I can't control them. But what I can do is control me. And so I have to pay attention to the data that I'm receiving, right? Is it overwhelmingly that people say, wow, Tinisha, you sort of came across as defensive? And that comes from people who look like me, and other people. Then I have to maybe think about, is there another way that I could respond, to that, right? But I think you also have to figure out and discern when someone is giving you constructive or destructive feedback. Discern what's the difference between it, because at the end of the day, what's most important, and you said Travis, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Travis, is you being effective and you being successful. And we get to control our attitude and our behavior that helps us in any context. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So in recognizing and navigating these implicit codes, next, Eric, I wish I had another thing for, so let's really get into the meat of this. Again, this is what I wish I knew. I wish I even knew that there was such a thing as unwritten rules. The second thing I wish I knew was how to really uncover them. And these are the things that I've learned through research and personal experience and from my peers. And that is, be quiet, observe everything. Who are the people who are talking at the meeting? Who gets the special projects? Who gets promoted? Who's getting demoted? How does the boss imply or infer expectations? And by this, this was given me to a peer. We were talking about when the unwritten rules contradict the written rules. So let's say you work in an environment where they tout, we're all about work-life balance. You know, we don't want you here outside of your work hours. When you take leave, you're on leave. That's what they say on paper. That's what they tell you verbally. But you're on a call one day and you hear ding, ding, and all of a sudden your boss's picture comes up into the frame and you hear, oh, Sally or Joe, I thought you were in Australia on vacation. Isn't it like 2 a.m. there? And they go, oh yeah, but I really thought it was important to join this meeting. You know, just at my level, I think it's important not to miss these meetings. In the chat box, what message did they just send you?
Are you asking what?
Or you're unmute. Yes, unmute.
Are you asking what message your coworker sent you back?
Oh, I'm sorry. Your boss. Like
Oh.
your boss was on leave, not expected to join the meeting. But when the meeting starts, you hear the ding ding, and it's your boss. And someone says, oh my God, I thought you were in Australia on vacation. Isn't it like 2 a.m. there? And your boss says, yes, but I felt this meeting was really important for me to attend.
Maybe in the chat he had already like stated that he was going to join the meeting and that he felt it was important. So like now he has to repeat himself or.
Mm-hmm. But what message is your boss sending to you? If your boss joined a meeting while he or she was on vacation in Australia, it's 2 a.m. there. What are they telling you in terms of expectations? What are they communicating? Huh?
It's a really important meeting.
Mm-hmm. True. And some other thoughts?
Two from the chat that I'll read, Tanisha, are that they don't listen to directions well, they are valued, and there's not a lot of work-life balance. You work even while on vacation. So I'll take moderator's privilege and add on to those points and say, if you ever go on vacation, they might be, whether or not they expect you to come on when you're on vacation, you're going to think that they want that and feel pressure to do so.
Absolutely. Exactly. And so many times a boss may imply or infer their expectations by role modeling them, right? Now, whether or not they expect you to do it, you won't know that until what happens. You violate it and you don't join the meeting, right? Or you get emails after 6 o'clock and you don't respond right away. And the next day your boss might say, hey, did you get that email that I sent you last night? I was hoping that you would answer that or something. They're telling you those expectations. Again, not right or wrong, just how do you uncover these? When you think about the structure of a meeting, are the conversations sort of free flowing? Are they dominated by a few at the top? Do they value if you debate, sort of push back a little bit, share a divergent perspective? Or is everyone expected to just sort of nod? Or do people just not say anything because they don't expect that whatever they contribute will be valued? What do people wear? Is it business casual? Is it formal business? Is it sort of dressed down? How do they socialize? Is there a certain place that people go at lunch? Is there one day a week that there's an expectation that everybody get together? Do most people eat at their desk? Who has the power and influence? Pay attention to those people that seem to be the mover and shakers. What are they doing? How do they influence people to get on board with whatever they propose? How do people present ideas? How do they get value vetted? So I'm gonna stop real quick and share with you one time that I violated an unwritten rule. And this was in a military context. So one of the things that I've realized throughout my career is that for every sector that you work in, whether it's academic, it's private, it's public, it's nonprofit, military, there are different rules for each one of those contexts. So in the military, customs and courtesies, protocol is very important. I was so geeked about my first job in the federal government. I was a military spouse. We were stationed overseas in England. It had taken me 4 years to get in the federal government. And again, I was just so excited to have this job that I thought I was going to go in there and show them, you know, I deserve to have this job. They made the right choice with me. And so I wanted to prove my worth right away. So what did I do? We had an issue. So give you a little more context. I was what we called a drug demand reduction program manager. That's a fancy title for I was the PP queen. So I was the person who ran the drug testing program for the military for that base. Every morning I had to leave my office to go to another base where I didn't have an office, and I was conducting the drug testing out of a theater that I had to reserve every night before. I was using the theater phone to place my phone calls because I didn't have an office. So I asked around and I said, who do I need to talk to about getting some office space so that I can stop using the theater? And so people gave me names and they said, these are the people who can make decisions on that base. I was like, okay, cool. I crafted this email. I took my time with it, made sure it sounded really professional and nice. But one little sentence in there, I didn't realize I should not have put in there until I hit send, all proud of myself. 5 minutes later, I get a phone call from someone very angry, and he goes, Tinisha Agramonte, this is Chief so-and-so. I don't know who you think you are, but you never direct someone at my level to attend a meeting. And that's when I know I did something wrong. What I did in that email to these people is I said, I'm setting up a meeting. I look forward to meeting with you at this place, this time. I will see you soon. Anyone tell me what was wrong with that if I'm writing the highest ranked people on the base? Anything come through the chat, Eric?
No, not on that yet.
Okay. So just in case you haven't had military experience, there's a chain of command. There's a way that you get things done. What you do not do is direct someone who is very senior to you to a meeting. I didn't realize that. I was just so excited that I took the initiative to put together a meeting. As a matter of fact, I was so proud of myself. I sort of leaned back after I hit send. I was like patting myself on the back. And I tell you what, I got deflated so quick when I got that phone call and chewed out, right? Fortunately for me, that person took me under his wing, after that, and sort of showed me the ropes. Next. All right, so I want you to pay close attention to contradictions in the workplace, because there are these things that are written in the policy or stated, again, versus what is actually done. So managers say they promote open and honest dialogue, but if you push back or challenge, it's met with pushback. An organization may say that diversity and inclusion is really important to them, the core values of the organization, but there are definitely biases present for people who speak with an accent, use language associated with certain socioeconomic class. And I'm going to stop and just give you an example of this. One of the things that we uncovered with the First Generation Professionals Initiative was looking at the role that socioeconomic class plays in one's career trajectory. So one of the things that we found out, and I didn't explain this to you earlier, so let me say this now. As a civil rights practitioner, I am responsible for ensuring that our hiring policies, practices, procedures, all those HR practices and procedures are fair and equitable. Throughout my career, we always look at these singular protected dimensions of diversity like race, national origin, gender, disability, color, in trying to figure out why people may not be promoted at rates we expect. They're not being hired at rates that we would expect. But in looking at those singular characteristics, I started thinking about my own career trajectory, and I can say without a doubt, while my race and my gender may have played a factor, what I really think played a factor was coming from a low income background with a mom who was a single teen parent who worked hourly wage positions, so that when it was time for me to go to college, although my mom did a great job of instilling confidence in me, teaching me life lessons and skills. Like I tell everyone, I knew how to cross a 8-lane street in Los Angeles at the age of 8 because I had to get myself to school. So my mom gave me a little bus pass, put it on a shoestring, tied it around my neck. I was taking the city bus, crossing city streets at 8 years old. So she taught me how to be independent. But what my mom couldn't give me were the tools and resources I needed to access college and to thrive college once I got there. And my mom did not have the social capital. She did not have the financial resources. She did not have the networks to expose me to people who had already been to college, to expose me to people who had already worked in a professional workplace. So when I joined the professional workspace, I know the way I showed up. I didn't look the part. I didn't speak the part. I didn't behave the part. And now through the research we've done with first generation professionals, I know that those 3 things dictate whether or not people perceive you as a good culture fit, as a good organizational fit. Like, do the way you look, behave, and speak comport with the organizational culture. And so thinking about that, one of the things that we found is recruitment bias. I tell everyone that I've not met one American who does not speak accented English. And by accented English, I mean, if you're from the South, you're from the Appalachian region, you're from Jersey, New York, anyone knows there's definitely different Bostonian accents. There's a working class Boston accent, and there's an academic Boston accent. Would you all agree with that? I'm trying to look at the cameras, right? We make assumptions about people who speak with accents we associate with working class, right? And when I joined the workforce, I definitely will tell you that is how I spoke, and I know it was perceived in a way that people felt I was not as competent or capable. So we do know that when folks are recruiting, they're looking at things like, where did you go to school? And they're making assumptions about your intellectual capability based on where you went to school. We're finding there's biases about people who matriculate through community college like I did, or if it took you longer than 4 years to graduate from school, or if you were working while you were in school and that impacted your GPA. There are all these things that are not necessarily rooted in merit, but biases along socioeconomic class that are used to disqualify people from consideration. So even though we say diversity and inclusion are important, there are some times where that just doesn't play out in reality. We talked about this workplace flexibility. Employees think that there's flexibility, and so I was told that we value telework, but yet when I telework, I'm viewed a little unfavorably about that, or there's a lot of pressure to check in on, make sure that I'm working. Again, on the casual wear, we talked about the merit. I'm trying to pull this down a little bit. Okay, you guys can see this. I'm gonna go to the next one because in the interest of time, I want to go into the conversation. So here's some tips for navigating unwritten rules. And again, I want all of you to join in with some tips that you may have. So again, I can't underscore this enough. That listen, observe, be patient. Don't fight the norms right out. Just first observe, learn, and reflect. Pay attention to the people who are successful with navigating these organizational norms and emulate those behaviors that appear to be effective. Ask questions, learn the lesson. Sometimes there are people who are so quick to try to give answers. Sometimes you just need to get some information, ask questions, absorb information. Find a mentor who can help you with learning the lay of the land. That was very helpful for me. Also, a sponsor who can speak for you or advocate on your behalf, especially when you may have had some missteps, right? And this person knows you, the whole person the totality of your body of work, not just those instances where you may have had a misstep. So I'm going to stop here real quick and make sure that we clarify what's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. So I want you all to unmute your phone. First, let's talk about what's a mentor. What is the role of a mentor?
Good afternoon, Tinisha. This is Yvette. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. So, to me, mentor is someone that I usually look up to. So I look up to you because you're a well known person in your field. You have some skills that I would admire and would like to mirror from you. So usually people may not know that they're mentors to us. That leadership skills, how do you present yourself in front of people? So those are the things that I like to mirror from a mentor.
Thank you so much, Yvette. Thank you for joining today too. And how about a sponsor? What's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor?
So for me, sponsor will be a person who knows you and knows your skills and could vouch for you. So if a position comes up and they know that you're really good at doing something or you had the potential to succeed in that area, they will be your sponsor and say, listen, this person has what it takes to do the job.
Absolutely. That's great. So the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, like Yvette said, a mentor is someone who is knowledgeable about the space that you're in. They can help you navigate, avoid those pitfalls. They can help you with career planning. But a sponsor is someone who has significant power and influence, someone who can get into spaces that you have not yet been privy to get into, someone who can speak on your behalf, whether that's publicly or in those spaces that you're not in. They're putting their reputation and their credibility on the line to vouch for you. Any other thoughts on mentor and sponsor before we move on? Okay. Next. All right. So again, some more rules. Develop a rebound or resiliency strategy for when you violate an unwritten rule. It does not have to be a career derailleur. And that's something that I didn't realize initially. I was almost ready to give up sometimes that I had these missteps. I thought, I'm not cut out for this. I don't appear to be management material. I'm just going to pull back and sort of disengage, do the bare minimum because I don't want to risk messing up. But what's better is to make sure that you have a rebound strategy or resiliency strategy in the front. So if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to mess up. That's inevitable and it's okay. But what are the things I need to do when it happens? So I'm going to give you a couple of tips on that. One, be willing to acknowledge your mistake. That's the first thing. Second thing, come up with a plan to mitigate it happening again in the future. Third, be prepared to make a commitment to implementing that plan so you can reassure your boss and the stakeholders that you work with that you're taking the appropriate steps to mitigate it from occurring again in the future. Someone, oh, okay, I see that. I'll let you know, Annie. So with those three things that I just said, does anyone else have some other tips on this rebound and resiliency strategy? Because I think it's very important to be prepared ahead of time, knowing that you will make mistakes, knowing that you will violate these unwritten rules. What are other things that people out here on this call employ when they make a mistake? I'm trying to make it interactive, folks. So you can unmute your phone. Nope. Byron, are you still there?
I am here.
Okay. Anything you can think of for overcoming a mistake, showing resiliency? What's like a strategy?
Well, I think, my perspective is, one, you have to be a bit vulnerable and recognize and admit that, I got it wrong. And I think what separates folks that are successful and not as successful are folks that know how to recover and know how to do it well. And I use an analogy. The difference between a pro golfer and an amateur golfer is when they make a bad shot, they recover very well. And so I think that's the first piece of acknowledging that you made a mistake, own it, and say, I'm not perfect, and try to, course correct from there, whether, addressing it with the person or the situation that you had it with. And certainly just say, hey, look, it was an honest mistake, or, this was my thinking when I did this, and I wasn't aware, but I would like to not have this happen again in the future. And so I think, in my past, that's how I've addressed it. Some folks, in some situations, you can't make mistakes, and you're scorned and scarred from that point, and that may mean you have to move on or go on outside of where you currently are. But for folks that really have your best interest, and really, most people are very reasonable to understand that you made a mistake, you did something that was unwritten rule, and you don't want to do that again, and kind of talk through how you can avoid that. That would be my approach.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I want to talk a little bit more about the course correct too. And I'll use also a sports analogy. You'll hear the most successful athletes say that you either lose or you learn. And I think that's a really important lesson. Like, don't look at it as a loss. Look at it as an opportunity to gain additional information on where you went wrong and what you can do in the future to get it right. And to be honest with you, there are some companies out there that pay people for not making mistakes, but for at least taking the initiative to make informed decisions about things. And it may not pan out, but the organization will say, you know what, at least we now know what won't work, right? So I think what I'm trying to do is make sure that you understand and accept that you're gonna make mistakes, and be okay with that. Just be willing to learn from it, because there are actually some positives in making a mistake. All right, so learn from others' mistakes and successes too. That's another thing. I've learned when I'm in staff meetings in particular, I've heard people make certain comments and I've seen reactions to that, or I've seen people take liberties with doing certain things and it was not received favorably. So I learned from that. Pay attention, be observant, know when and how to address unwritten rules that are harmful. So I do want to talk a little bit about, there are times when these contradictory unwritten rules really do clash with the organization's core values, and that is detrimental to an organization. And I want everyone on this call to know it is not, you do not have to follow an unwritten rule that forces you to violate ethics, laws, or your moral compass, right? So I always say, I'm willing to do anything the boss wants me to do. I can try to figure out how to make this happen for the boss, as long as it does not violate law, policy, ethics, or my morality. Next. Okay, so this is in order to really be successful with these unwritten rules. These are a few competencies that I think have been helpful social astuteness, really learning how to read other people and have some self-awareness so that you can understand how they see you. So said another way, this is really about not only having self-awareness of your behavior, but understanding the impact of your behavior on other people is key. Learning how to have some interpersonal influence. You know, how can you convince another person and affect how and what they might think? A lot of times that means understanding what is important to them, what is something of interest to them, and leveraging that to influence how they think or how they perceive whatever it is that you're trying to present to them. Networking ability, learning how to network. This is how you get those mentors. This is how you get those sponsors. This is how you build your network so that when you're unsure about how to navigate, you can call on folks and get some advice and guidance. Always work on, if you have been told you don't seem to come across as sincere or genuine, really, that is a skill. You know, part of it is part of your character, but I also think that you can work on making sure that you're honest, open, and forthright. Because I think, as Byron said earlier, people are willing to help you when they understand it was just an honest mistake and you're forthright about making the mistake or whatever you did. Pulse check, are there anything that I'm missing? I'm getting some private checks. I can't see all of them. I'm looking at some things that have come to me. Someone asked, how can they join the first generation professionals? And I'll make sure Eric sends out that information, but LinkedIn, you can find me, that's one. One has to open up, be vulnerable, acknowledge it. We talked about that and have a plan to avoid the pitfall. Absolutely, Alex. How many mentors should a person have? I think you can have endless mentors, to be honest with you. You want mentors from all different backgrounds, from different industries, because they all will give you a different perspective that's helpful. Okay. How do I click off of this? All right. Okay, so let's talk about understanding the impact of unwritten rules. And I'm doing a time check right now. Ooh, I gotta hurry up, I'm sorry. Okay, so when we talk, of course, as a civil rights practitioner, I can't let you off of this call without talking about the impact of unwritten rules on diversity and inclusion. And I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but if you have unwritten rules that impact how someone feels welcomed in an organization, how someone feels about the mission of the organization and being connected to it in a way that's meaningful, that they can provide contributions to the organizations, and that when they do it, they will be listened to, they will feel respected, that their opinion is respected, that the work that they do is respected and valued. If your unwritten rules negatively impact those things that I just said, then an organization has to be disruptive in dismantling, whereas uncovering and then dismantling those unwritten rules that are harmful to the organization's culture. And just because you have a diverse workplace does not mean that it's an inclusive workplace. I read an article the other day that did a great job of talking about this. Like if you're making a cake and you have all the ingredients, flour, egg, something like that, it is about taking and blending those ingredients for a final product. So the way I like to think about this is all the diversity in our workplace. If we are not leveraging each and every person and their perspective in the organization, then we are not harnessing the full power of their collective experiences and knowledges to achieve our mission, right? So again, you can have a lot of diversity in the workplace, but if it is not used and people do not feel connected and included, then you do not have inclusion. Next. All right, this is another little graphic staff threw in there because they thought my presentation was boring, so they added some little graphics, and I love this. Someone trying to figure out the unwritten rules so that they can also advance to the top. Next. All right, so here again, just some more negative consequences of unwritten rules. It creates inequities when some know the rules and others don't. You know, we all have been in situations, whether it's in high school, college, or the workplace, where you feel like you're either in the in group or you're in the out group. And it does not feel good to be in the out group. And it's not good for the organization to be in the out group, because that means that we're not benefiting from someone's contributions. So I always tell people in the workplace, it's not the people who quit and leave that we need to be concerned about. It's the people who quit and stay. The people who quit and stay, who are disengaged in the workplace, can create a lot of issues, because now someone has to take up the slack for them, but also we're just not benefiting from whatever it is they would bring to the table. Your creativity is lost if I can't bring my unique experience and self. And I'll give you a great example of this. One of our first generation professionals that works with us is a PhD. She works for a research agency. And they were doing research on the rate at which pregnant women return to work after giving birth. When the data came in, some of her peers from middle class, upper class backgrounds were astonished to learn that some women returned back to work as early as a week after giving birth. She was not surprised by that, coming from a low income background, being raised in a trailer community. She was like, all of the women that I was raised around do not have paid maternity leave. They work hourly wage positions. And so they're forced to return back to work right away because they're breadwinners. The family needs their money. Can you imagine the research paper and the findings if it did not have her perspective in there? And that's why it's important for us to have the perspective of all these different people, to make sure that we do not have biased reports, to make sure that we're not shaming anyone when you have multiple perspectives. When behaviors are different than what's written, employees will start distrusting the organization's mission and their core values, again, leading to disengagement. The culture might promote behaviors of mediocrity, fear, politics, and groupthink. And I think anyone who's ever read about the shuttle disasters, where companies have failed, it is because they do not value divergent perspectives. They are not listening to alternate points of views. And so they're unable to effectively manage risk. Because if I saw something was going wrong in a company, but the company's culture was that you do not raise problems unless you have a solution. Well, if I didn't feel like I had a solution, then I might not mention the problem. If I don't mention the problem, we will not have an opportunity to address that and leverage the collective experience of other people who can come up with the resolution. But at a minimum, I should be able to bring forward what is the risk without feeling like I would be penalized, or that someone would think I'm incompetent or I'm dumb because I did not come with the solution. But if that's the culture that was created, it will lead to those risks not being identified. Next. All right. So how to address a harmful unwritten rules. Time your concerns appropriately. Be specific about addressing. Focus on the positives. You might have some solutions in mind. Find support among your colleagues. Next. I'm trying to rush through because I think I have like 5 minutes. So we're supposed to talk a little bit about this. I want to make sure before I get off the phone, I have some little rules that I want to make sure that I did go on over. Oh, real important about coming to DC. And I know this is recorded, so I have to be very careful about how I say this. But when I first came to DC, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be working with the creme de la creme. Like these are the top people from all over the nation. And sometimes that's not true. Sometimes people are in those spots and those places and you wonder, how did they get here, right? I only say that not as to slam those folks, but rather to build you up. If there's anyone on this call that needs to hear this who has ever suffered from imposter syndrome, where you are competent and you are capable because the data shows you that, there's evidence that shows you've excelled in school, you've won awards or accolades, but for whatever reason, you've internalized that you're not as good, that you got here by luck, that it was a mistake, that they just haven't found you out, that you're an imposter. I want you to know that You are meant to be wherever you're at. You deserve to be wherever you're at. Do not be intimidated by what you perceive to be all these people who are so much smarter and better than you. You deserve to be right in those spaces with them. So I'm telling you, and Michelle Obama said this, that she's been in all these places with all these people who were supposed to be so smart, and she didn't think she belonged there. And she was like, wait a minute, it's not me. You don't belong, here. So just want you to be thinking about that. And another thing, real quick, I'll share this example of a few years ago, I was asked to present somewhere and I got intimidated by all of the prospective panelists. They had PhDs, they had authored books, they had been on the speaking circuit all over television. And I thought, why do they want me on the stage with them? I don't deserve to be on that stage with them. I'm not of the caliber of those folks on the panel. And so I declined the invitation. And when I told a friend that story, she looked at me and she says, I want you to look at me, Tinisha. Throughout your life, there will be a number of people who will doubt you, but you do not get to be one of those people. And that's what I want to leave with you today, that you do not get to doubt yourself. I hope that today that I've at least introduced you to this concept, this thing called unwritten rules, and that you at least now armed with knowing that and some tools that you will be able to uncover them in the workplace and navigate way better than I did. I feel like I owe this to all those people who helped me when I felt lost. And I want to make sure that you're empowered not to be lost, that you can just focus on thriving and succeeding in the workplace. So I had to get that out before I forget. I think we have probably 5-10 minutes if there are some questions that I can answer.
Feel free to just come on over video without typing if you have them. And Mariana did make a comment here that you could probably see, Tanisha, that thank you for that point on imposter syndrome, especially true for first-generation professionals and students and easy to fall into. So thank you for that.
Yes, definitely. First-generation professionals are more susceptible. That's what the research says. Anyone who comes from a group where there are stereotypes about that group, especially in terms of their intellect, their capabilities, their competencies, and there are low expectations for that group. Sometimes we, if we're members of that group, have internalized those stereotypes about us, and it takes work to overcome that.
And I'll say while people might be coming up with a question, something I thought of during your presentation that I haven't thought of before is a lot of what you're describing about figuring out what the unwritten rules are remind me of starting a new class at FIU, and it's a professor you've never had, and the syllabus might say certain things, but you don't know till things get going about how they're really going to react to a question or how they're really going to grade your paper. And every single class, we figure those things out and adapt. And even if first-generation students going into a professional job for the first time, if they've been at FIU or any other school, they've been through that process, and we have some experience with how to do that we can apply to the job situation.
Absolutely. You're so right, Eric, that every new class, every new job, every new organization, that is an opportunity for us to feel a little bit out of sorts, because each one of those new contexts will come with new rules, new unwritten rules. But it's also just natural to be scary when you're going into uncharted territory. And that's okay. Embrace that, accept that. But what I don't want you to embrace is that you will not thrive and that you're not competent and capable of learning how to navigate in that space, and that want you to realize that you belong in that space. You have earned a place in that space, and I know you'll do well in it. Any others? Come on, we got about 5 more minutes.
Well, Ms. Agramonte, Travis again. What I didn't mention was I used to be in the Army and I used to be in the military, so it was funny that you talked about, because there's a lot of unwritten rules in the military base and all those cultures, and everything you talked about I pretty much been through. And that's why I would say those setbacks, pretty much helped me out to where I am today. And I have a strong sense and keen of emotional intelligence. So that's why I would tell people, when you go to a new place, just look at the behaviors of your superiors, your boss, and see what those connections are and just make note of it. And thank you again, Mr. Agramonte.
Thank you. That is great feedback. I had to learn so much working on a military base, so many unwritten rules there. And I do want to make a comment about, I mentioned earlier about the way that we speak. A lot of times people will follow up with me and they'll say, oh my God, you're so articulate. How did you learn how to speak so well? And I tell people first, thank you, because I don't always feel like I do. But I want to share a tip with you that I use. I love watching these news programs, and I pay attention to people who I think speak well. And I have a little notebook. Normally, I keep it right next to me. In staff meetings, when I'm watching television, if I hear a phrase that was really powerful, succinct, but it seemed to influence people, and you see the head nods, the affirmative, I write that down. If I hear words that I don't understand, I've never heard before, I write that down. And that's how you can build your vocabulary. That's how you can build phrases that you can incorporate into your speaking vocabulary and build confidence about speaking. And then a lot of times just keep it simple. Because I will tell you, when I tried to use words that I was unfamiliar with, that's when I would mispronounce them, or that's when I would use them out of context. And it's nothing like making that mistake when you're speaking, because now you're so caught up on, oh my God, did they hear that? I made that mistake. Did I use that word right? And now it's hard to get back on track.